Ghost Rider is a 2007 American superhero film based on the Marvel Comics character of the same name. The film was produced by Columbia Pictures and Marvel Entertainment, and it falls under the broader category of supernatural action films. What makes Ghost Rider stand out from other superhero movies of its era is its deeply gothic and horror-influenced tone. Unlike the bright and colorful world of Spider-Man or the grounded realism of films like Batman Begins, Ghost Rider leans heavily into fire, darkness, demons, and deals with the devil. It is a film that draws from a very specific corner of the Marvel Universe, one that most mainstream audiences had not explored before this movie came out. The film is set primarily in the United States, specifically drawing on the American South and Southwest as its backdrop, which gives the story a very unique visual identity. The wide open roads, the desert landscapes, and the small towns all contribute to the feeling that this is a story rooted in American folklore and mythology. The concept of a man selling his soul to the devil and being transformed into a flaming skeletal avenger is something that fits perfectly into the tradition of American Gothic storytelling, and the filmmakers leaned into that aesthetic throughout. The movie was directed by Mark Steven Johnson, who also wrote the screenplay. Johnson had previously worked on the Daredevil film in 2003, another Marvel adaptation that dealt with a darker and more morally complex hero. The production was handled by Columbia Pictures in association with Marvel Entertainment, and the film had a budget of approximately $110 million. It was a major studio production with significant resources behind it, designed to launch a new franchise within the Marvel catalog. The film stars Nicolas Cage in the lead role, and it was a project that Cage had been passionate about for many years before it finally went into production. Cage is a well-known comic book enthusiast and has spoken publicly about his love for the Ghost Rider character in particular. His personal investment in the project is evident throughout the film, and he brought a very specific energy to the role that is difficult to imagine anyone else replicating. Alongside Cage, the film features Eva Mendes, Wes Bentley, Sam Elliott, Peter Fonda, and Jimin Hunsu in significant roles, all of which we will get into in detail shortly. Plot details. The story of Ghost Rider begins in a small-town carnival setting, where we are introduced to a young motorcycle stunt rider named Johnny Blaze. Johnny is a teenager who performs death-defying stunts alongside his father, Barton Blaze, as part of a traveling circus-style show. The two of them share a deep bond, and their life on the road, while unconventional, is full of genuine warmth and love. Johnny also has a childhood sweetheart named Roxanne, and the two of them dream of one day leaving the carnival life behind and building something together. Everything changes when Johnny discovers that his father has been diagnosed with inoperable lung cancer. Desperate and terrified of losing the only family he has, Johnny is approached by a mysterious stranger named Mephistopheles, who is in fact the devil himself. Mephistopheles offers Johnny a deal. He will cure Barton Blaze of his cancer in exchange for Johnny's soul. In a moment of youthful desperation and love, Johnny signs the contract in blood and seals his fate. The devil keeps his word in the most cruel way possible. Barton is cured of his cancer, but the very next morning he is killed during a motorcycle stunt performance in what appears to be an accident. Mephistopheles reminds Johnny that he never promised his father would live, only that he would be cured of cancer. Devastated and bound to his contract, Johnny is torn away from Roxanne by the devil's intervention and forced to live with the knowledge that his soul is not his own. He grows up to become one of the greatest motorcycle stunt performers in the world, performing increasingly dangerous and impossible feats, and surviving all of them because of his supernatural bond with Mephistopheles. Johnny becomes famous and wealthy, but he is hollow inside, carrying the weight of his deal and the loss of everything he truly cared about. The main story picks up years later when Johnny is now a full-grown adult. He reconnects with Roxanne, who has become a television news reporter, and the old feelings between them immediately resurface. Just as Johnny begins to hope that he might find some happiness, Mephistopheles reappears to collect on the debt. The devil has a job for his ghost rider. A rogue demon named Blackheart, who is also the son of Mephistopheles, has come to Earth with 3 fallen angels known as the Hidden. Blackheart's goal is to acquire a contract called the Contract of San Venganza, which contains the souls of an entire corrupt Texas town that were collected by a previous ghost rider long ago. If Blackheart gets hold of this contract, he will have the power of 1,000 evil souls at his command, enough to overthrow his father and plunge the world into darkness. Mephistopheles transforms Johnny into the Ghost Rider, a supernatural bounty hunter and spirit of vengeance. In this form, Johnny's flesh burns away and his skull becomes a flaming head of fire. He rides a motorcycle that is consumed in hellfire and leaves a trail of burning destruction wherever he goes. The Ghost Rider has the power to look into a person's soul and make them experience every bit of pain and suffering they have ever caused others, a power called the penance stare, which is essentially the ultimate form of supernatural justice. Johnny must now track down and stop Blackheart before the demon can find the contract. Along the way, he is guided by a mysterious caretaker at a graveyard who seems to know far more about the Ghost Rider legend than he lets on. This caretaker eventually reveals himself to be Carter Slade, a legendary Texas Ranger who was the original Ghost Rider from the Frontier era. Carter gives Johnny the location of the contract and provides him with a measure of hope, reminding him that the power of the Ghost Rider can be used for good, even if its origins are rooted in evil. Blackheart manages to use Roxanne as leverage, kidnapping her to force Ghost Rider to bring him the contract. In the climactic final battle, Johnny arrives in a small abandoned Texas town, the same San Venganza referenced in the contract. A brutal confrontation unfolds between Ghost Rider and Blackheart and his 3 fallen angel allies. Ghost Rider defeats the 3 fallen angels one by one, exploiting their elemental weaknesses. When Blackheart acquires the contract and absorbs all the souls within it, he believes he has become all-powerful. However, Johnny uses the penance stare on Blackheart while he is filled with 1,000 corrupt souls, and the stare multiplies, burning through every single soul inside the demon simultaneously and destroying him from within. After the battle, Mephistopheles appears and offers to return Johnny's soul as a reward. Johnny refuses. He tells the devil to keep the soul and uses the Ghost Rider power as a weapon against the devil's own agenda, vowing to use his curse as a force for justice and to turn it against anyone Mephistopheles sends after him. The film ends with Johnny riding off on his motorcycle into the night, no longer just the devil's bounty hunter, but a self-determined spirit of vengeance who answers to no one. Cast: Nicolas Cage plays Johnny Blaze, the central character of the film. Cage delivers a performance that is intentionally strange and heightened, leaning into the larger-than-life nature of a man who has made a deal with the devil and carries that burden every day of his life. Cage has publicly stated that he considered Ghost Rider one of his dream roles, and his enthusiasm for the character is visible throughout. Eva Mendes plays Roxanne Simpson, Johnny's childhood love and the emotional anchor of the story. Mendes brings warmth and intelligence to the role, making Roxanne a believable person rather than simply a plot device. Her chemistry with Cage gives the film its human emotional core. Wes Bentley plays Blackheart, the primary villain of the film. Bentley portrays the demon with a cold and unsettling calm that makes him genuinely threatening. Blackheart is not a loud or explosive villain but rather a patient and calculating one, which Bentley captures effectively. Sam Elliott plays the caretaker, the graveyard keeper who serves as a mentor figure to Johnny. Elliott's voice and presence are perfectly suited to the role, and his scenes bring a Western mythology quality to the film that elevates it considerably. When his character's true identity is revealed, it feels like a genuinely satisfying payoff. Peter Fonda plays Mephistopheles, the devil himself. Fonda brings an eerie and quietly menacing quality to the role, playing the character with the kind of cold pleasantness that makes him far more unsettling than a traditionally angry villain would be. Jimin Hunsu plays Abigor, one of Blackheart's 3 fallen angel allies who controls the element of wind. Hunsu's physical presence and intensity make him a memorable secondary antagonist even in a limited role. Release date: Ghost Rider was released in the United States on February 16, 2007. The film was released by Columbia Pictures and opened in wide theatrical release across North America and international markets shortly after. The February release date was somewhat unusual for a major superhero film, as most big-budget comic book adaptations tend to be released during the summer blockbuster season or during the holiday period. However, the film's release strategy proved effective. Ghost Rider opened at number 1 at the box office in its opening weekend, earning approximately $45 million domestically in its first 3 days. The film went on to gross over $228 million worldwide against its production budget of around $110 million, making it a genuine box office success and prompting the development of a sequel. The film received mixed to negative reviews from critics upon its release. Many reviewers felt that the script was underdeveloped and that the tonal balance between horror, action, and romance was inconsistent. However, audiences responded more warmly, and the film has developed a significant cult following over the years, particularly among fans of the comic book character and fans of Nicolas Cage's more unconventional performances. Trailer information: The original theatrical trailer for Ghost Rider was released in late 2006 and generated significant excitement among Marvel fans and general audiences alike. The trailer leaned heavily into the visual spectacle of the Ghost Rider transformation, showing the skull engulfed in flames, the Hellfire motorcycle, and the penance stare effect in a way that made the film's visual ambition immediately clear. The trailer used a combination of dramatic music and action-heavy editing to establish the tone of the film and introduced audiences to the core conflict between Johnny Blaze, Blackheart, and Mephistopheles. The trailer was effective in conveying the supernatural and gothic atmosphere of the story while also highlighting the film's more mainstream action sequences to appeal to a broader audience. Ghost Rider remains a fascinating piece of Marvel film history. It was made during an era before the Marvel Cinematic Universe existed, when Marvel characters were being adapted independently by different studios with varying degrees of creative success. The film is bold in its willingness to fully commit to the supernatural and gothic elements of the source material. It does not shy away from the fact that its hero is literally a man with a flaming skull who rides a motorcycle through hellfire. That commitment to its own strange identity is part of what makes it so enduring as a cult film. Nicolas Cage's performance divides audiences, but for those who appreciate the character and the mythology, it is exactly the kind of performance this story deserved. Ghost Rider is not a perfect film, but it is a unique and genuinely entertaining one that occupies a very specific space in the history of superhero cinema. Ghost Rider, 2007, complete story in full detail. The beginning, a boy, his father, and a carnival life. The story of Ghost Rider begins not in a city full of heroes and villains, but in the humble and dusty world of a traveling carnival. We are introduced to a young boy named Johnny Blaze, a teenager who has grown up knowing nothing but the smell of motor oil, the roar of motorcycle engines, and the cheering of crowds. Johnny's entire world revolves around 2 things. The first is his father, Barton Blaze, a veteran motorcycle stunt performer who has spent his life riding in front of audiences and defying death with every jump and every trick he performs. The second is the thrill of the ride itself, the feeling of absolute freedom that comes from being on a motorcycle with nothing between you and the open road. Barton Blaze is not just Johnny's father. He is his hero, his teacher, and his closest companion. The 2 of them live and work together as part of the traveling stunt show, performing increasingly daring feats for audiences across small American towns. It is a life that most people would find chaotic and unstable, but for Johnny it is the only life he has ever known, and he loves it with everything he has. He has inherited his father's natural talent for writing and has already shown signs of being an exceptional performer in his own right. Within this world, Johnny has also found something else that gives his life meaning. Her name is Roxanne, a girl from outside the carnival world who has captured Johnny's heart completely. The two of them share a quiet and genuine connection, the kind that forms between young people who recognize something true and real in each other even before they fully understand what love means. Roxanne represents everything beyond the carnival for Johnny, the possibility of a different life, a settled life, a life with roots and permanence. Together they make quiet plans and whisper about the future, dreaming of the day they can leave the transient life of the stunt show behind and build something lasting together. But those dreams are shattered before they can take shape. The deal with the devil. One evening, Johnny's world collapses inward when he discovers the truth about his father's health. Barton Blaze has been diagnosed with lung cancer, and the disease is already advanced and inoperable. The doctors have essentially told Barton that there is nothing to be done, that he is living on borrowed time. For Johnny, this news is devastating in a way that goes beyond ordinary grief. His father is the only real family he has, and the thought of losing him is simply unbearable. It is in this moment of absolute desperation that Johnny is approached by a man he has never seen before. The stranger is calm, well-dressed, and speaks with the kind of smooth confidence that immediately sets off instincts in anyone paying close attention. He introduces himself, and Johnny comes to understand, perhaps through some supernatural intuition, that this is no ordinary man. This is Mephistopheles. This is the devil himself, walking the earth in human form and presenting himself to a desperate teenage boy with an offer that seems almost too good to be real. The offer is simple. Mephistopheles will cure Barton Blaze of his cancer, remove the disease entirely, and restore his health. In exchange, all he asks for is Johnny's soul. The contract is laid out plainly, without tricks or complicated language, or so it appears. Johnny, young and terrified and overwhelmed by the love he has for his father, does not stop to think carefully enough about the fine print. He signs the contract in blood, binding himself to Mephistopheles in a deal that cannot be undone, a deal that will define every remaining day of his life. What happens next reveals the true cruelty of dealing with the devil. Barton Blaze wakes up the following morning completely free of cancer. The disease is gone, exactly as promised. But Mephistopheles never said that curing the cancer meant Barton would survive. He never said anything about protecting the man from other dangers. And so, the very next day during a routine performance, Barton Blaze is killed in what appears to be a stunt accident. The motorcycle fails him at exactly the wrong moment, and the man who had just been miraculously cured of a terminal illness dies on the dirt in front of an audience. Johnny is left alone, grieving, and bound to the devil. Mephistopheles makes his presence known again in the aftermath, reminding Johnny of what he agreed to and informing him that the contract is active. Roxanne, sensing that something beyond ordinary tragedy has touched Johnny, tries to reach him, but Mephistopheles ensures that connection is severed. Johnny, consumed by guilt and grief and the terrible knowledge that he has sold his soul to the devil, pushes Roxanne away and watches the only good thing left in his life walk out of it. Growing up under the shadow of the contract. The years pass. Johnny Blaze grows up and becomes exactly what his father was, a motorcycle stunt performer, but at a level that surpasses anything his father could have imagined. Johnny is now one of the most famous daredevil performers in the world. He attempts stunts that no sane human being would ever consider survivable. He jumps over rows of helicopters, clears impossible distances, rides through walls of fire, and walks away from crashes and wipeouts that should kill him every single time. And the reason he walks away is simple. He cannot die. Not easily, not in the ordinary way. Mephistopheles is protecting his investment. Johnny lives in a kind of hollow success. He is wealthy and famous, performing in arenas before massive crowds who come specifically to watch him cheat death. but inside he is empty. He carries the weight of his deal every single day. He reads scripture obsessively, stacking his trailer with religious texts as though searching for some loophole or some form of salvation that might release him from what he agreed to. He drinks jelly beans by the bag and listens to old music, developing a collection of eccentric habits that reveal a man who is deeply disconnected from the ordinary rhythms of human life. He is famous, but he has no real relationships, no close friends, no one who truly knows him. He is a man living on borrowed time in a contract with the devil, and he knows it. Despite everything, Johnny never loses his love for riding. The motorcycle is the one thing that connects him to his father, to his past, and to whatever remains of the boy he was before the deal changed everything. When he is on a motorcycle, even a man as burdened as Johnny Blaze can feel something that resembles freedom. Roxanne returns. Everything shifts when Roxanne reappears in Johnny's life. She has grown up to become a television news reporter, professional and accomplished, and she is in the process of covering a story that brings her into contact with Johnny again after all the years they have been apart. The moment they see each other, the old connection is immediate and undeniable. Whatever Mephistopheles did to separate them all those years ago, whatever walls Johnny built around himself in the years of his isolation, none of it can entirely erase what was between them. Roxanne approaches Johnny with the combination of professional purpose and personal history that makes their reunion emotionally complicated. Johnny, for his part, is awkward and genuine, showing the parts of himself that he has kept hidden from the rest of the world. They share a moment that makes it clear to both of them that the feelings have never truly gone away, and the possibility of something real begins to flicker back to life between them. But the timing could not be worse. Because at exactly the moment when Johnny's personal life shows the first signs of hope in decades, Mephistopheles comes to collect. The devil calls in the debt. Mephistopheles arrives with the composed authority of someone who has been patient for a very long time and is now ready to see the terms of his contract fulfilled. He explains the situation to Johnny with the kind of calm certainty that makes it clear there is no arguing, no escaping, and no negotiating. There is a problem that requires the Ghost Rider, and Johnny is the Ghost Rider, whether he wants to be or not. The problem is Blackheart. Blackheart is Mephistopheles' own son, a demon of considerable power who has grown ambitious and resentful of his father's authority. Blackheart has come to Earth with a very specific goal in mind. He wants to find and acquire something called the Contract of San Venganza, an ancient document that was drawn up long ago when a previous Ghost Rider collected the corrupted souls of an entire Texas town, a town so thoroughly steeped in evil and violence that its entire population was damned. That contract contains within it the captured souls of every one of those condemned people, and whoever possesses the contract possesses the power of every soul inside it. For Blackheart, the Contract of San Venganza represents the key to overthrowing his father. If he can absorb the power of 1,000 evil souls simultaneously, he will become strong enough to challenge Mephistopheles directly and seize control of his domain. But the consequences for the world of the living would be catastrophic. A demon with that much power and that much hatred would transform the earth into something unrecognizable. Mephistopheles cannot stop Blackheart directly. The dynamics of their supernatural relationship prevent it. But his Ghost Rider can. Johnny is activated as the devil's bounty hunter, the spirit of vengeance that serves as Mephistopheles' instrument against threats that require a different kind of power. And so, whether Johnny agrees or not, whether he is ready or not, the transformation begins. The first transformation. What happens to Johnny Blaze when he becomes the Ghost Rider is one of the most visually and conceptually striking things about the film. It begins with heat. An intense, building, internal heat that Johnny can feel rising inside him as if every cell in his body is being ignited from within. Then the fire comes to the surface. His flesh burns away, not consumed and destroyed, but transformed, replaced by something supernatural and terrible. His skull becomes visible and then becomes engulfed in roaring, crackling hellfire that burns orange and blue and white with an intensity that should reduce everything around it to ash. The motorcycle transforms alongside him. The ordinary machine becomes something from a nightmare, the metal blackening and burning, the tires leaving trails of fire on the asphalt, the entire vehicle reimagined as an instrument of supernatural vengeance. The Ghost Rider that emerges is not Johnny Blaze in any ordinary sense. It is an ancient and powerful force that has taken up residence in Johnny's body, a spirit of vengeance that has existed for far longer than Johnny himself has been alive. The Ghost Rider has specific powers that are rooted in the concept of supernatural justice. The most significant of these is the penance stare. When the Ghost Rider locks eyes with a person and uses this ability, the target is forced to experience every single moment of pain and suffering that they have ever inflicted on another living being. Every cruel act, every violent deed, every instance of harm they have ever caused comes back to them magnified and concentrated, burning through their soul in a single overwhelming moment. For truly evil people, those who have caused enormous suffering, the penance stare can be utterly devastating. It is not a physical attack. It is a spiritual reckoning, and it is absolute. Beyond the penance stare, the Ghost Rider possesses enormous physical strength and resilience, the ability to channel hellfire through his chain as a weapon, and a supernatural instinct for tracking evil. The motorcycle in Ghost Rider form can travel at extraordinary speeds and defy physical laws in ways that make it as much a supernatural entity as its rider. Hunting Blackheart's allies. The conflict escalates quickly once Ghost Rider is active. Blackheart has not come to Earth alone. He is accompanied by 3 fallen angels known as the Hidden, ancient supernatural beings who were cast out of heaven long ago and who have aligned themselves with Blackheart in his rebellion against Mephistopheles. Each of the 3 Hidden is associated with a specific natural element, and each of them is a formidable opponent in their own right. Ghost Rider encounters and confronts these 3 beings across different locations and circumstances, and the battles that follow each have their own distinct character. The 3 elemental fallen angels represent different aspects of natural power, and Ghost Rider must find ways to use the specific nature of his supernatural abilities against each of them. These confrontations are brutal and visually striking, with the Ghost Rider's hellfire chain serving as his primary weapon and his sheer supernatural resilience allowing him to absorb punishment that would destroy any ordinary being. Through each battle, Ghost Rider proves himself not simply as a powerful fighter but as something more specific and deliberate. He is a hunter of evil, drawn to darkness and corruption by a supernatural instinct that he cannot fully control. He does not simply fight because he is attacked. He is pulled toward the wicked the way a compass is pulled toward magnetic north, and once he has a target, he pursues it with relentless and terrible focus. The problem is that the Ghost Rider transformation does not end cleanly when the fighting is over. Johnny struggles with the division between his human self and the spirit of vengeance that has taken hold of him. During the day, under sunlight, he is still Johnny Blaze, the man with all the memories and feelings and vulnerabilities of an ordinary human being. But when darkness comes or when evil is near, the transformation can happen without his choosing it. He is losing control of the boundary between himself and the Ghost Rider, and that is terrifying in a very specific way, because the Ghost Rider does not discriminate with the same precision that Johnny would want. Carter Slade and the Legacy of the Ghost Rider. One of the most important moments in Johnny's journey comes when he encounters the old caretaker who works at a graveyard near where Johnny is operating. The caretaker is a weathered and deeply knowledgeable man who seems to understand what Johnny is going through with a level of personal familiarity that is immediately suspicious. The old man knows things about the Ghost Rider that he should not know unless he had experienced them himself. And that is exactly the truth. The caretaker reveals himself to be Carter Slade, a man whose history stretches back to the era of the American frontier. Carter Slade was a Texas Ranger who, long ago, made his own deal and became a Ghost Rider in his own right. He was the one tasked with collecting the contract of San Venganza from the corrupt town, and he was the one who chose to hide the contract rather than deliver it to Mephistopheles, knowing that its power was too dangerous to be used by anyone, including the devil himself. Carter has been living in his diminished, aged form ever since, his own transformation spent, his supernatural energy nearly exhausted after a lifetime of carrying the secret. But he has enough left for one final ride, and he uses it to help Johnny. He gives Johnny the location of the contract of San Venganza and provides him with something equally important, a sense of perspective and hope. Carter reminds Johnny that the power of the Ghost Rider is not inherently evil, even if its origins are dark. It is a power that can be turned toward justice. The spirit of vengeance does not have to serve the devil. It can serve something higher if the person carrying it has the courage and the will to make that choice. The image of Carter Slade riding one last time in a pale and ghostly form of his own old transformation is one of the film's most quietly powerful moments. It is a passing of the torch from one cursed rider to another, a reminder that Johnny is part of something larger than himself, a legacy of supernatural justice that has existed for longer than he has been alive. Blackheart's move against Roxanne. Blackheart is many things, but he is not stupid. He understands that Johnny Blaze is the Ghost Rider, and he understands that Johnny Blaze is a man, and men have weaknesses. When Blackheart realizes that Roxanne is the person who matters most to Johnny, he moves against her. He uses her as leverage, taking her captive and making it clear that her life is the price of Johnny's cooperation. If Johnny wants Roxanne to survive, he must bring the contract of San Venganza directly to Blackheart. It is a trap, and Johnny knows it is a trap. But Roxanne's life is not something he is willing to gamble with, and so he goes anyway. He uses the information Carter Slade gave him to locate the hidden contract, retrieving it from where it has been concealed for decades. And then he rides toward the confrontation that has been building since the beginning of the film. The location of the final battle is the abandoned Texas town of San Venganza itself, the same place where those 1,000 corrupt souls were collected generations ago. There is a grim poetry to it. The place where the contract was born is now the place where its power will be decided once and for all. The final confrontation. When Ghost Rider arrives in San Venganza, the full weight of the supernatural conflict comes to a head. Blackheart is waiting, and Roxanne is with him, alive but in danger. The town around them is utterly still, the kind of silence that only exists in places where terrible things have happened and the land itself remembers. What follows is the climax of everything the film has been building toward. Ghost Rider faces not just Blackheart, but the last remaining threats from the fallen angel allies, and he dispatches them with the brutal efficiency of a supernatural force that has now fully come into its own. The penance stare, the hellfire chain, the raw physical power of the Ghost Rider form, all of it is deployed in a series of confrontations that leave the villainous forces one by one destroyed or scattered. Blackheart, confident in his power and his planning, takes the contract and does exactly what he intended. He absorbs the 1,000 souls, pulling them into himself and becoming something vast and terrible, a demon amplified by the concentrated evil of an entire condemned population. He believes that in this state he is beyond what Ghost Rider can touch. He has the power of 1,000 souls. What can a single spirit of vengeance do against that? The answer comes in the form of the penance stare, deployed not against one person's sins but against 1,000 simultaneously. When Ghost Rider locks the penance stare onto Blackheart in his soul-amplified state, the effect is multiplicative rather than singular. Every one of those 1,000 absorbed souls is subjected to the stare at the same time, each one forced to experience its own reckoning, its own pain reflected and returned. The corruption that Blackheart thought made him powerful becomes the very thing that destroys him. The souls burn through him from the inside, and the demon that came to earth to overthrow his father collapses and is destroyed, his ambition ending in exactly the kind of spiritual agony that his evil deserved. Johnny's choice. It is the offer that Johnny has been waiting for his entire adult life. It is everything he should want. His soul back, his freedom restored, the devil's grip on his life finally released. Any reasonable person would take the deal without a second thought. Johnny refuses. What Johnny understands in that moment is that giving back the Ghost Rider power means giving up the only weapon he has that can actually hurt the devil's plans. If he takes his soul back and becomes an ordinary man again, Mephistopheles wins in a different way. The devil gets what he wants, the problem resolved, the rider disarmed, and no one left to challenge him. Johnny decides that he would rather remain the Ghost Rider on his own terms than be free on the devil's terms. He tells Mephistopheles directly and without flinching that he will use every ounce of the Ghost Rider's power to fight against whatever Mephistopheles sends into the world. He will turn the devil's own weapon against him. He will be the spirit of vengeance not in service to hell but in opposition to it. And there is nothing Mephistopheles can do about it because the contract, the deal, still stands. Johnny's soul still belongs technically to the devil, which means the devil is still bound by the original terms and cannot simply destroy him without violating his own agreements. It is the one way that Johnny Blaze can turn the curse into something close to a choice. Not freedom, not exactly, but agency. Not a clean life, but a purposeful one. The road ahead. The film ends with Johnny Blaze riding away from San Venganza on his motorcycle, alone on a long American highway with nothing ahead of him but open road and the long shadows of late afternoon. Roxanne watches him go, understanding at least in part why he made the choice he did, even if it means that whatever future they might have had together is complicated and uncertain. Johnny is not the hero who goes home to a normal life and a loving family and a quiet existence. He is the Ghost Rider, a creature of the night, a supernatural avenger who rides toward darkness rather than away from it. He carries a curse that he has now decided to treat as a calling. Every evil that crosses his path, every cruel and corrupt and wicked thing that moves through the world, becomes something that he will ride toward rather than away from. He is not entirely free, and he is not entirely his own man. But he has made a choice, perhaps the first truly free choice he has made since he signed that contract in blood as a desperate and grieving teenager. The story of Ghost Rider is ultimately not a story about superpowers or supernatural battles, though it has both of those things in abundance. It is a story about a man who made a terrible mistake out of love, lived with the consequences of that mistake for his entire life, and eventually found a way to face those consequences with something that looks, at least from a certain angle, like dignity. Johnny Blaze did not defeat the devil. He did not escape the contract. He did not undo what was done. But he chose how to carry it forward, and in a story built around deals and debts and obligations written in blood, that choice is the closest thing to victory that the world of Ghost Rider allows. That is the complete story of Ghost Rider from beginning to end. If you made it all the way through this, thank you from the bottom of the heart. Please give this video a like because it genuinely helps more people find this content, and allows us to keep making detailed breakdowns like this one. Share it with a friend who loves Marvel, who loves superhero cinema, or who simply appreciates a good story told in full. And if you are not already subscribed, now is the perfect time to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you are always the first to know when something new drops on this channel. We will see you in the next one. You said, give me actor's life history in lengthy details. Give me actor's life history in lengthy details. Don't give resources with it. Don't give too much headings. Point 25 April Claude responded, Ghost Rider, 2007, actor's life history in full detail. Orchestrated comprehensive biographical narratives for 6 Ghost Rider cast members. Orchestrated comprehensive biographical narratives for 6 Ghost Rider cast members. Ghost Rider, 2007, actor's life history in full detail. Nicolas Cage. Nicolas Cage was born on January 7, 1964, in Long Beach, California. His full birth name is Nicholas Kim Coppola, and the fact that his last name is Coppola is not a coincidence. Nicolas is the nephew of one of the most celebrated and influential filmmakers in the history of American cinema, Francis Ford Coppola, the man responsible for the Godfather trilogy and Apocalypse Now. Growing up with that kind of creative legacy surrounding him was both a gift and a burden. Nicolas was exposed to the world of filmmaking from an early age, absorbing the culture and craft of cinema through his family environment in a way that most aspiring actors never get the opportunity to experience. However, Nicolas made a very deliberate decision early in his career to separate himself from his famous uncle's name. He was determined to succeed or fail entirely on his own merits, without the Coppola name opening doors for him or creating expectations that he had not earned himself. This is why he adopted the stage name Nicolas Cage, a name he took partly in tribute to Marvel Comics character Luke Cage, reflecting his deep and lifelong love of comic books. That decision to change his name was a statement of personal independence that would come to define the kind of performer he would become. Nicolas Cage has always done things on his own terms. He grew up in a household that was creatively stimulating but personally complicated. His father, August Coppola, was a literature professor, and his mother, Joy Vogelsang, was a dancer and choreographer who later struggled with emotional and mental health difficulties. Growing up watching his mother's challenges had a significant effect on Nicolas, contributing to the emotional depth and sensitivity that would eventually make him such a compelling screen presence. He has spoken in interviews about how his childhood experiences shaped his understanding of human vulnerability and pain, two qualities that run through almost every performance he has ever given. Nicolas discovered his passion for acting as a teenager and enrolled in the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco, though he did not stay long before deciding to pursue professional work directly. He made his film debut in 1982 with a small role in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and from there his career began building with remarkable speed. His early work in films like Valley Girl and Rumblefish showed a young actor with an unusual instinctive quality, someone who was not content to simply recite lines and hit marks but who approached every role as an opportunity for genuine transformation. The performance that truly announced Nicolas Cage as a major talent was his work in Birdie in 1984, where he played a traumatized Vietnam veteran alongside Matthew Modine. For this role, Cage had two of his teeth removed without anesthesia to better understand the physical experience of pain, which was an early and dramatic demonstration of the extreme commitment to his craft that would become one of the defining characteristics of his career. This willingness to go further than any reasonable person would consider necessary is something that runs through his entire body of work. Throughout the late 1980s and into the 1990s, Cage built a reputation as one of the most adventurous and unpredictable actors working in Hollywood. He appeared in films like Moonstruck, Raising Arizona, and Wild at Heart, the latter directed by David Lynch and winning the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. These were not safe commercial choices. They were films that pushed boundaries and asked audiences to follow a performer into uncomfortable and unusual emotional territory. Cage was willing to be strange, to be vulnerable, to be ridiculous and profound simultaneously in a way that very few of his peers were capable of or willing to attempt. The peak of his critical recognition came in 1995 when Nicolas Cage won the Academy Award for Best Actor for his performance in Leaving Las Vegas, directed by Mike Figgis. In the film, Cage played an alcoholic screenwriter who travels to Las Vegas with the deliberate intention of drinking himself to death. The performance is devastating and completely committed, with Cage bringing an honesty and rawness to the role that made it impossible to look away even when what was on screen was deeply uncomfortable. Winning the Oscar at the age of 31 placed Cage at the absolute top of the Hollywood hierarchy, and the projects that followed reflected that status. From the mid-1990s onward, Cage transitioned into a phase of his career that made him one of the highest paid and most commercially successful actors in the world. Films like The Rock, Con Air, and Face/Off made him an action superstar of the first order, and his combination of physical screen presence and genuine acting ability gave him a credibility in the action genre that many of his contemporaries lacked. He was not simply a body performing stunts. He was an actor who happened to be in action films, and that distinction made those films better than they might otherwise have been. His personal life during this period was equally eventful. He has been married multiple times. His first marriage was to Patricia Arquette, herself a talented actress, in 1995, a marriage that lasted until 2001. His second marriage to Lisa Marie Presley, daughter of Elvis Presley, in 2002 lasted only a few months. He married Alice Kim in 2004, with whom he has a son named Kal-El, a name taken directly from Superman's Kryptonian birth name, once again reflecting Cage's deep affection for comic book mythology. The marriage lasted until 2016. Nicolas Cage's relationship with comic book characters goes far beyond casual fandom. He has multiple tattoos related to comic book and supernatural iconography, and his son Kal-El is testament to how seriously he takes that culture. Ghost Rider was a project he had wanted to make for years before it finally came together in 2007. The character of Johnny Blaze, a man carrying a supernatural curse that he did not choose and cannot escape, clearly resonated with Cage on a personal level. He has described the Ghost Rider as one of the great American folk heroes in comic book form, and his performance in the film reflects a genuine passion for the material that goes beyond professional obligation. In the years following Ghost Rider, Cage's career took a turn that became the subject of enormous public discussion. He had earned and spent enormous amounts of money throughout his career, acquiring castles, exotic animals, rare comic books, and a lifestyle of almost incomprehensible extravagance. By the late 2000s, financial difficulties resulting from this spending and issues with back taxes meant that Cage found himself in a position where he needed to work constantly to address his debts. This led to a period where he appeared in a large number of films of varying quality, taking on projects that he might not have chosen purely on creative grounds if his financial situation had been different. However, this period of Nicolas Cage's career, often discussed dismissively as a decline, has been substantially reappraised in the years since. Many of the films he made during this time have developed passionate cult followings. Films like Bad Lieutenant, Port of Call New Orleans, Mandy, and Pig revealed an actor who was still capable of extraordinary work when the material was worthy of him. His performance in Pig in 2021, a quiet and deeply emotional film about grief and authenticity, was widely regarded as one of the finest performances of his entire career and reminded audiences and critics of the depth that had always been there beneath the more eccentric surface choices. Nicolas Cage is now in his early 60s and continues to work prolifically. He represents one of the most genuinely singular careers in the history of American cinema, a man who won an Oscar, became an action superstar, developed a reputation for wildly theatrical choices, accumulated and lost enormous wealth, and through all of it never stopped being one of the most watchable and fascinating performers in the business. Eva Mendes. Eva Mendes was born on March 5, 1974, in Miami, Florida, to Cuban immigrant parents. Her family relocated to Los Angeles when she was a young child, and she grew up in the Glendale and Los Feliz neighborhoods of the city, areas with large Latino communities where her cultural heritage was a constant and grounding presence in her daily life. Her upbringing was shaped significantly by her Cuban roots, and she has spoken extensively throughout her career about how her family background informed her values, her sense of identity, and her understanding of what hard work and persistence actually mean. Eva was one of several children in her family, and her childhood was marked by the kind of working-class pragmatism that comes from a household where money was not abundant, and where you learn from an early age that nothing comes without effort. Her mother raised her and her siblings largely on her own after her parents separated, and watching her mother navigate that challenge gave Eva an early and lasting respect for strength and resilience. These are qualities that would serve her well in an industry that is not known for being kind to people, particularly to women, and particularly to women of color who do not fit neatly into the categories that Hollywood was most comfortable with during the 1990s and early 2000s. Eva initially studied marketing at California State University, Northridge, with no particular intention of pursuing an acting career. It was almost accidental that she ended up in front of a camera at all. A talent manager spotted her and suggested she try commercial work, which led to her appearing in print advertisements and then to small acting roles. She made her film debut in the late 1990s with a small part in Children of the Corn V, which was not exactly a prestigious beginning, but she was building her foundation and learning the craft through practical experience rather than formal training. Her career shifted significantly in the early 2000s when she appeared in Training Day alongside Denzel Washington and Ethan Hawke. Although her role was relatively small, the film was a massive critical and commercial success, and being associated with that project raised her profile considerably. From there she moved into a series of increasingly prominent roles that showcased both her obvious physical beauty and her genuine acting ability. Films like Too Fast, Too Furious and Hitch introduced her to wider mainstream audiences, and the combination of charisma, warmth, and intelligence she brought to these performances established her as a genuine star rather than simply a beautiful face attached to whatever story was being told around her. Ghost Rider in 2007 represented one of her highest-profile leading roles to that point, and her performance as Roxanne brought a groundedness and emotional authenticity to a film that could easily have felt weightless without a convincing human center. The romantic chemistry between her character and Nicolas Cage's Johnny Blaze gave the story its emotional stakes, and Eva's ability to make Roxanne feel like a real and intelligent person rather than simply a love interest was a significant contribution to the film's overall impact. Throughout her career, Eva Mendes navigated the particular challenges of being a Latina actress in Hollywood with considerable intelligence and grace. She has spoken candidly about the limited and often stereotyped roles that were available to Latina women in mainstream American cinema during the peak years of her career, and she made deliberate choices to avoid being confined by those limitations wherever possible. She worked with a wide range of directors and appeared in films across many different genres, building a body of work that demonstrated genuine range and ambition. Her personal life took a significant and life-changing turn when she began a relationship with actor Ryan Gosling, whom she met on the set of the 2012 film The Place Beyond the Pines. The relationship between Eva Mendes and Ryan Gosling became one of the most discussed and admired in Hollywood, notable partly for its extraordinary privacy. In an entertainment industry where celebrity relationships are typically performed publicly and documented exhaustively, Eva and Ryan chose to keep their life together almost entirely out of the public eye. They have 2 daughters together, Esmeralda, born in 2014, and Amada, born in 2016. Following the birth of her children, Eva largely stepped back from acting, making a deliberate choice to prioritize her family over her career during the years when her daughters were young. This decision was not made from financial necessity or lack of opportunity but from a deeply personal sense of what mattered most to her. She has discussed this choice in various interviews with a directness and lack of defensiveness that reflects a woman who is entirely secure in the priorities she has set for herself. Eva Mendes represents a kind of career arc that is relatively rare in Hollywood. She achieved genuine stardom, made choices that prioritized her personal life over her professional momentum, and built a life outside the entertainment industry's constant demands without disappearing entirely or becoming defined by regret. She remains a respected and admired figure in the industry. Sam Elliott. Sam Elliott was born on August 9, 1944, in Sacramento, California, and represents one of the most distinctive and immediately recognizable presences in the history of American film and television. There is almost no one else in the entertainment world quite like Sam Elliott. His voice is in a category by itself, a deep, slow, resonant instrument that seems to belong to a different era entirely, one of wide open spaces and long silences and words chosen carefully because there are not enough hours in the day to waste them on unnecessary speech. Combined with his magnificent mustache, which has become as famous as the man wearing it, and a physical presence that communicates quiet authority without effort, Sam Elliott is one of those performers who seems to have been born specifically for the roles he plays. He grew up in Portland, Oregon, after his family relocated from Sacramento when he was young. His father was a wildlife manager for the state of Oregon, and Sam grew up with a deep connection to the American West and to the natural world that has informed his entire career and personal sensibility. He attended the University of Oregon briefly before transferring to Clark College, and his path to acting was not a straight or simple one. He worked various jobs before committing fully to pursuing a performance career, and he spent years in Los Angeles building his foundation slowly and steadily through small television roles and gradual industry connections. Sam Elliott's career began to find its footing in the late 1960s and early 1970s. And from the very beginning it was clear that he occupied a very specific space in the American entertainment landscape. He was the quintessential Western archetype, but with depth and intelligence behind the surface image. His early television work included appearances in series like Gunsmoke and Mission Impossible, building the kind of experience and professional credibility that can only come from putting in the years of consistent work that most audiences never see. His film career developed steadily through the 1970s and into the 1980s, with notable appearances in films like Lifeguard and The Legacy. But it was the 1988 film Roadhouse, in which he played a mysterious and worldly mentor figure to Patrick Swayze's cooler-than-cool bouncer, that gave many mainstream audiences their defining early impression of Sam Elliott's screen persona. The film has become a massive cult classic, and Elliott's performance is widely considered the soul of the entire movie. Perhaps even more importantly, Sam Elliott became deeply associated with the Western genre in a way that no other actor of his generation managed quite as completely. Films like Tombstone, in which he played Virgil Earp alongside Kurt Russell's legendary performance as Wyatt Earp, and Gettysburg, in which he portrayed General John Buford with a quiet and commanding historical gravity, cemented his reputation as the definitive screen embodiment of a certain kind of American man. A man of few words, enormous inner strength, a deeply held personal code of honor, and a relationship to the land and to history that gives everything he does a sense of weight and permanence. His personal life is notable for a relationship that has lasted decades in an industry where long partnerships are genuinely unusual. Sam Elliott met actress Katharine Ross, herself a legendary screen presence known for her iconic roles in The Graduate and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, on the set of the 1978 film The Legacy. They began a relationship that eventually led to marriage in 1984, and the two of them have been together ever since, one of the most enduring partnerships in Hollywood history. They have a daughter together named Cleo Rose Elliott. Sam Elliott's later career brought him some of the finest critical recognition of his life. His performance in the 2018 film A Star is Born, directed by and starring Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga, as Jackson Maine's older brother Bobby earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. The performance was a masterclass in the specific kind of acting that Elliott has always done best, the kind where everything is communicated through stillness and presence, and the quality of silence between the spoken words rather than through showy dramatic moments. It was a performance that reminded everyone paying attention that behind the famous voice and the famous mustache was a genuinely extraordinary actor. In Ghost Rider, Sam Elliott's role as the caretaker and revealed former Ghost Rider Carter Slade was perfectly suited to his screen persona. There is something about Sam Elliott that makes you believe immediately that he is connected to old things, to history, to stories that stretch back further than living memory. When his character reveals the truth about who he really is and what he has carried for all those years, it works entirely because of the specific quality of weight and history that Elliot brings to everything he does. Peter Fonda. Peter Fonda was born on February 23, 1940, in New York City, and passed away on August 16, 2019, in Los Angeles, at the age of 79. He was the son of one of Hollywood's most celebrated actors, Henry Fonda, and the brother of Jane Fonda, one of the most significant actresses and political activists of her generation. The Fonda family represents one of the most remarkable dynasties in American entertainment history, spanning multiple generations and multiple forms of cultural influence. Peter's childhood was marked by both privilege and profound personal tragedy. When he was 10 years old, his mother Frances Ford Seymour died by suicide, a loss that had an enormous and lasting impact on him. He has spoken about this event throughout his life as something that fundamentally shaped his emotional world and his relationship to vulnerability, loss, and the search for meaning. His father Henry, though a deeply respected public figure, was known for being emotionally distant and difficult as a parent, and Peter's relationship with his father was complicated and sometimes painful in ways that took decades to fully process. Despite or perhaps because of these difficulties, Peter developed a fierce independent spirit that would come to define his career and his public persona. He studied acting and eventually made his way into the entertainment industry, appearing in television and film during the early 1960s. But it was not until the late 1960s that Peter Fonda became a genuinely iconic cultural figure, and when it happened in a way that changed American cinema permanently. Easy Rider, released in 1969, was a film that Peter Fonda produced, co-wrote, and starred in alongside Dennis Hopper and Jack Nicholson. Hopper directed the film, but it was fundamentally Peter Fonda's vision, born from his desire to make a modern Western that reflected the reality of contemporary American culture and the counterculture movement that was reshaping the country. The film follows two motorcycle riders traveling across America and confronting the hostility and violence that lurk beneath the surface of a society that claims to value freedom while actually fearing it deeply. Easy Rider was made for a tiny fraction of the budget of a typical Hollywood production and went on to earn an enormous amount of money while becoming one of the defining cultural artifacts of its era. The film made Peter Fonda a symbol of an entire generation and an entire set of values centered on freedom, rebellion, and the search for authentic American experience. His image on a motorcycle, wearing the famous Stars and Stripes helmet, became one of the most reproduced and recognizable images of the 1960s counterculture. Easy Rider was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay, which Peter co-wrote with Dennis Hopper and Terry Southern, and it launched Jack Nicholson's career into the stratosphere with a supporting performance that is still talked about today. Peter Fonda's career in the decades following Easy Rider was a mixture of continued creative work in film and television and a personal life that went through significant changes and challenges. He was married multiple times and had children. He continued acting throughout his career, appearing in a wide variety of projects, and in 1997 he received an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor for his performance in Ulee's Gold, a quiet and deeply felt film about a beekeeper dealing with family trauma and responsibility. The nomination was a recognition that the cultural iconography of Easy Rider had not obscured the fact that Peter Fonda was a genuinely accomplished actor capable of the kind of restrained and emotionally precise work that demanding dramatic material requires. In Ghost Rider, Peter Fonda was cast as Mephistopheles, the devil himself, and the choice was inspired in ways that went beyond simple casting logic. There is something about Peter Fonda, something in his bearing and his history and his relationship to American mythology, that makes him completely believable as a figure who exists outside ordinary human rules. He played the devil with a cold and pleasant reasonableness that was far more unsettling than any amount of theatrical menace would have been. Peter Fonda's Mephistopheles does not rage or threaten. He simply states terms and waits, with the absolute certainty of someone who has all the time in the world and has never once not gotten what he came for. Peter Fonda passed away in 2019 after a battle with lung cancer. His death was mourned widely as the passing of one of the genuine originals of American cinema, a man whose contribution to film culture extended far beyond the films themselves into the territory of cultural history and generational identity. Wes Bentley. Wes Bentley was born on September 4, 1978, in Jonesboro, Arkansas. He grew up in a religious household, the son of a Methodist minister, and his upbringing in the American South shaped his early identity in significant ways. Bentley was drawn to the arts from a young age and eventually made his way to New York to pursue formal training, studying at the Juilliard School's drama program, one of the most prestigious and rigorous acting conservatories in the world. His training at Juilliard gave him a technical foundation and a seriousness of approach to the craft that would inform his best work throughout his career. His film debut came in 1998 with a small role in Beloved, directed by Jonathan Demme and starring Oprah Winfrey. But it was the following year that Wes Bentley became one of the most talked about young actors in Hollywood. American Beauty, directed by Sam Mendes and released in 1999, was the defining film of its cultural moment, winning the Academy Award for Best Picture and generating an enormous amount of critical attention and cultural discussion. Bentley played Ricky Fitz, the strange and observant teenager next door who sees beauty in unexpected places and carries a deep inner life beneath a surface of social awkwardness. His performance was extraordinary for a young actor with limited film experience, bringing a genuine depth and mystery to a character who could easily have become a caricature. American Beauty put Wes Bentley on the map in a very significant way, and the industry and the public expected great things from him in the years that followed. What happened instead was a period of personal struggle that Bentley has spoken about with admirable honesty in later years. He developed a serious addiction to heroin and crack cocaine that effectively derailed his career during what should have been its most productive and ascending phase. The years following American Beauty saw Bentley largely absent from significant film projects, his addiction consuming the opportunities that his talent had created and his early success had made available. He has spoken about this period not with shame or defensiveness but with a clear-eyed acknowledgement of what happened and why. Bentley has described feeling overwhelmed by the sudden attention and pressure that followed American Beauty, and turning to drugs as a way of managing the anxiety and disconnection that came with that kind of sudden and intense public recognition. The entertainment industry is not known for its kindness to young people who struggle, and Bentley's experience is a relatively common story told in an unusually honest way. Ghost Rider in 2007 represented part of Bentley's attempt to rebuild his career during this difficult period, and his performance as Blackheart demonstrated that the raw talent had not gone anywhere even as the personal struggles were ongoing. His portrayal of the villain as cold and patient, and almost bored in his certainty of eventual victory was effective and memorable, using restraint where another actor might have reached for theatricality. The genuine second chapter of Wes Bentley's career came with his sobriety, which he achieved and has spoken about publicly as the foundation upon which everything else in his life has been rebuilt. His casting as Game Warden James Dutton in the television series Yellowstone, created by Taylor Sheridan and starring Kevin Costner, gave him a platform and an audience that allowed his talent to fully express itself again. Yellowstone became one of the most watched and discussed television dramas in recent American television history, and Bentley's work in the series has been consistently praised. Wes Bentley's story is ultimately one of talent, loss, recovery, and return, a narrative arc that is more complicated and more human than the simple ascent stories that the entertainment industry prefers to tell about its performers. Jimin Hunsu. Jimin Hunsu was born on April 24, 1964, in Cotonou, in what is now the Republic of Benin in West Africa. His early life was marked by significant hardship and by a determination to find his own path that led him on a journey that very few people in similar circumstances could have imagined completing. When he was a teenager, Jimin left Benin and traveled to France with his older brother, hoping to find opportunities that were not available in their home country. What he found instead was profound difficulty. For several years in Paris, Jimin Hunsu was essentially homeless, sleeping where he could find shelter and surviving through whatever means were available to him on the streets of a foreign city where he did not initially have the language skills or the social connections to find stable work. This period of his life, which he has discussed in interviews with a combination of dignity and unflinching honesty, shaped everything about who he became as a person and as an artist. The experience of genuine poverty and survival in hostile circumstances gives Jimin Hunsu a quality in his performances that cannot be taught or simulated. It is the quality of a person who knows exactly how much the ordinary comforts of life are worth because he has lived without them. His path out of homelessness came through modeling. His extraordinary physical presence was noticed by a fashion industry professional, and Jimin began working as a model in France and eventually internationally. His modeling career gave him financial stability and visibility, and he appeared in music videos that further expanded his public profile, most notably in Janet Jackson's Love Will Never Do Without You, which introduced him to American audiences. The transition from modeling to acting was not instantaneous, but Jimin pursued it with the same determined persistence that had characterized his entire journey. He relocated to the United States to pursue an acting career seriously, and the role that changed everything came in 1997 when Steven Spielberg cast him in Amistad, the historical drama about a slave ship revolt and the legal battle that followed. Jimin played Sangbi, the leader of the revolt, in a physically and emotionally demanding performance that earned him his first Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. To go from homeless on the streets of Paris to an Oscar nomination within the span of roughly a decade is one of the more remarkable trajectories in the history of contemporary entertainment. His second Academy Award nomination came for his performance in Blood Diamond in 2006, opposite Leonardo DiCaprio, where he played Solomon Vandy, a Sierra Leonean fisherman separated from his family by the brutal conflict surrounding diamond mining in his country. The role allowed Hunsu to draw on a cultural and historical knowledge that went beyond what any research could provide, and his performance was devastating in its authenticity and emotional power. In Ghost Rider, Jimin Hunsu played Abigor, one of Blackheart's fallen angel companions, a role that was considerably smaller than the leading work he had done in Amistad or Blood Diamond, but that allowed his physical presence and intensity to contribute meaningfully to the film's supernatural threat. His professional reputation and the quality of his previous work gave the character a weight that the limited screen time might not otherwise have supported. Beyond his film work, Jimin Hunsu has been a consistent advocate for African people and African stories, using his platform to raise awareness of issues affecting the continent and to challenge the ways in which African culture and history are represented in mainstream entertainment. He has spoken about the challenges of being a Black African actor in Hollywood, where roles for African performers have historically been limited in number and often limited in complexity, and he has been vocal about the need for the industry to do better. Jimin Hunsu has continued working steadily across film and television, appearing in major franchise films including Guardians of the Galaxy, Furious 7, Aquaman, and A Quiet Place Part 2, as well as in more intimate dramatic projects that reflect his continued interest in substantial and meaningful storytelling. His career represents one of the most genuinely inspiring personal narratives in the history of the entertainment industry. A man who built something extraordinary from circumstances that would have defeated almost anyone else. The ancient roots of the Ghost Rider mythology. To truly understand Ghost Rider as a 2007 film, you cannot begin with Marvel Comics in 1972 or with a Hollywood production deal. You have to go back much further than that, all the way to the oldest stories that human beings have ever told about riders, spirits, fire, and the roads between the living world and whatever lies beyond it. The cultural DNA of Ghost Rider is extraordinarily old and extraordinarily rich, woven together from threads that stretch across thousands of years of human storytelling from cultures that never had any contact with each other but arrived at remarkably similar conclusions about what a supernatural rider represents and what it means. One of the oldest recurring mythological concepts in European tradition is the wild hunt, a spectral procession led by a ghostly figure riding through the night sky. This concept appears in Norse, Germanic, Celtic, and Anglo-Saxon folklore with variations in detail but a consistent and deeply unsettling core image. In these ancient stories, a great and terrible hunter leads a procession of supernatural beings across the sky, sometimes on horseback, sometimes accompanied by hounds or spirits, always moving with a sense of unstoppable purpose and absolute authority. To witness the wild hunt was considered an omen of disaster, war, or death. The riders in these stories were not frightening simply because they were supernatural. They were frightening because they represented forces of judgment and reckoning that existed entirely outside of human control or appeal. You could not negotiate with the wild hunt. You could not reason with it or plead for mercy. It moved according to its own ancient laws, and those laws were final. This concept of the unstoppable supernatural rider as an agent of cosmic justice is the deepest cultural root from which Ghost Rider grows. When you watch the Ghost Rider in the 2007 film riding through city streets with hellfire trailing behind him, pursuing evil with a relentless instinct that overrides every other consideration, you are watching a version of an idea that European cultures told around fires for thousands of years before electricity, before cinema, before comic books ever existed. The form changes, the horse becomes a motorcycle, the dark forest becomes a desert highway, but the essential meaning remains absolutely identical. Something rides through the night. It is looking for the wicked. And it does not stop. This concept of the ghostly rider was never limited to Europe. Native American traditions across the Great Plains and the Southwest held their own versions of supernatural riders and spirits of vengeance connected to the land itself. These indigenous traditions understood the desert and the open landscape as a place where the spiritual and physical worlds existed in closer proximity than anywhere else, where figures of judgment could move between one reality and another without the barriers that existed in more settled and domesticated environments. The American Southwest that serves as the visual backdrop of Ghost Rider 2007 is not just a cinematic choice for atmosphere. It is a landscape that has been understood as spiritually charged territory for thousands of years before a single European settler arrived. Across Latin American cultures, phantom riders have been embedded in folklore for generations, often understood as protective spirits rather than destructive ones, ghostly figures who appear on lonely roads to guide lost travelers or warn communities of coming danger. In Japan, the figure of the Midnight Rider appears in traditional stories about spirits that move along moonlit roads with purposes that ordinary humans cannot fully comprehend. What these diverse cultural traditions share is the recognition that movement across a landscape at night, especially solitary movement, carries a spiritual charge that settled daytime life does not possess. The rider in the dark has always been understood as something more than a person traveling from one place to another. The Faustian bargain and its enormous literary weight. At the heart of Ghost Rider 2007 is a deal with the devil, and this particular narrative structure is one of the most powerful and enduring frameworks in the entire history of Western literature and culture. The story of a person who bargains with a demonic force in exchange for something desperately desired, and then lives out the consequences of that bargain, is a story that human beings have told in one form or another for as long as recorded literature has existed. The Faust legend in its most recognized form comes from the German tradition, reaching its most culturally significant expression in the work of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, whose dramatic poem Faust is considered one of the greatest works in the German literary tradition and one of the most important texts in all of Western literature. The name of the devil in Ghost Rider, Mephistopheles, is taken directly from Goethe's text. This is not an accident. The filmmakers and the comic book writers before them were consciously connecting Johnny Blaze's story to this ancient and culturally weighty tradition, signaling to anyone paying close enough attention that this story operates on a mythological level that goes far beyond an ordinary superhero narrative. In the original Faust story, the central character is dragged off to hell at the story's conclusion, unable or unwilling to fight the contract he previously signed with Mephistopheles. The bargain defines him completely, and the ending is one of the most famously bleak in all of European literature. Ghost Rider takes that ancient framework and fundamentally reimagines it through a distinctly American lens. Johnny Blaze refuses the ending that Faust accepted. At the film's conclusion, when Mephistopheles offers to return his soul as payment for services rendered, Johnny declines. He turns the curse into something he controls rather than something that controls him. In doing so, the film transforms a European tale of inevitable doom into an American story of determined self-reinvention. This distinction is culturally enormous. The difference between the European Faust, who surrenders to his fate as the contractually obligated consequence of his own desperate choice, and the American Ghost Rider, who refuses to be permanently defined by the worst bargain of his life, reflects something real and specific about the mythological traditions and value systems of each culture. American storytelling has always been deeply invested in the idea of second chances, in the possibility of reinventing yourself regardless of your history, in the frontier spirit that says no situation is so thoroughly lost that a determined and resourceful individual cannot find a way through it. Ghost Rider takes one of Europe's darkest and most fatalistic myths and runs it through that American filter, producing something that shares the same ancient bones but arrives at an entirely different conclusion about what human beings are capable of when they finally decide to stop accepting what has been imposed on them. The Faustian bargain as a cultural concept also carries with it a very specific moral dimension that the film engages with honestly and seriously. Johnny Blaze is not a villain for making his deal. He is a teenager who loves his father, discovers he is dying, and in a moment of absolute desperation agrees to terms he does not fully understand with a being whose nature he cannot fully grasp. This is the human condition expressed in mythological language. We make choices under pressure, in moments when our emotional needs override our capacity for rational assessment, and then we spend years or decades living inside the consequences of those choices. The Faustian structure allows Ghost Rider to explore this universal human experience of being bound by a past version of yourself and the question of whether that binding is permanent. The American Western tradition and frontier justice. One of the most culturally significant and consistently underappreciated dimensions of Ghost Rider 2007 is its deep and deliberate connection to the American Western genre. This is not simply an aesthetic choice about using desert landscapes and wide open roads as backdrops for action sequences. It is a meaningful and sustained engagement with one of the oldest and most important storytelling traditions in American cultural history, and the film is richer and more resonant for audiences who understand that tradition and can recognize what the filmmakers were reaching for. The American Western as a genre is built around a very specific set of moral and cultural concerns that were deeply relevant to the historical moment when the American frontier was being settled, and those concerns have never entirely lost their cultural resonance because they touch on something genuinely fundamental about how Americans understand justice, law, freedom, and the relationship between the individual and the broader community. The classic Western hero is someone who exists outside of and apart from ordinary social structures. He cannot be fully absorbed into civilized community life. He carries something dark, or violent, or untamable that makes him unfit for ordinary domestic existence, and yet he acts as a necessary moral force that protects the community from the chaos and violence that surrounds it. The gunfighter rides into town, does what organized law cannot do, and rides out again because the peaceable world he has made possible is not a world where he himself can live. Ghost Rider inhabits this archetype completely, and without apology. The character of Carter Slade, played by Sam Elliott in the film, makes this cultural connection completely explicit in a way that rewards audiences who recognize what it means. Carter Slade was a Texas Ranger in the 19th century frontier era, a figure drawn directly from the world of the classic American Western, and he was the first ghost rider in America. The fact that the ghost rider legacy in this film's mythology originates with a frontier lawman is a deliberate and culturally meaningful decision. It places the supernatural character within the tradition of American frontier justice, the ancient American idea that there are forces moving through the landscape of this country that exist to balance out wrongdoing in ways that ordinary human law cannot always reach or adequately address. Sam Elliott's casting deepens this cultural layering in ways that go beyond his performance. Elliott himself, through decades of work in Western films and the specific gravitas and visual language that his screen presence communicates, is a walking embodiment of that frontier mythology. When he appears in Ghost Rider as the old caretaker who reveals himself as a former rider, his very presence carries the weight of every Western he has ever appeared in. Every time his voice and bearing and unmistakable physicality have told audiences that they are in the presence of a man connected to old things and long roads and a deeply personal moral code. The casting is itself a cultural statement about the tradition within which Ghost Rider belongs. The 1948 cowboy song Ghost Riders in the Sky, written by Stan Jones and later recorded by Johnny Cash, Marty Robbins, and dozens of other artists, is another piece of this cultural puzzle. The song describes spectral cowboys chasing an endless herd of demonic cattle across the heavens, cursed for their sins on earth, their faces gaunt and their eyes on fire. The imagery of damned riders galloping through fiery skies became a powerful piece of American folk mythology, embedding the concept of supernatural riders connected to guilt, punishment, and eternal restlessness deep into the popular cultural imagination of mid-20th century America. This song is part of the imaginative tradition that Marvel was drawing from when the Ghost Rider character was created, and its influence on the visual and thematic language of the 2007 film is impossible to ignore once you are aware of it. Christian theology and the supernatural framework. Ghost Rider 2007 is more theologically engaged than almost any other superhero film that preceded or followed it, and this engagement with Christian mythology gives it a cultural depth and seriousness that purely secular superhero narratives simply cannot reach. The entire cosmological framework of the film is drawn directly from Christian theological tradition, and the filmmakers treat this material with genuine respect and intellectual seriousness rather than using it as shallow decoration for action sequences. There is a God in this film's universe, implied throughout but never directly addressed or shown. There is a devil, Mephistopheles, who operates with enormous power but within boundaries and constraints that the divine has established. There are fallen angels who have rebelled against heaven and now serve darkness. There are souls that can be bought, sold, collected, and condemned. There is sin that must be reckoned with and evil that must be opposed by a force specifically designated for that purpose. There is the possibility of redemption, of turning something cursed and dark toward purposes that ultimately serve light and justice. Every single one of these concepts comes directly from Christian theological tradition, drawn from centuries of theological development within the Western Church and from the Hebrew biblical tradition that preceded it. The penance stare is the film's most theologically interesting invention, and it deserves examination as a piece of cultural and theological thinking rather than simply as a superhero power. The idea that a person who has caused suffering to others might be made to experience precisely that suffering, calibrated to exactly what they inflicted, is connected to ancient ideas about divine justice that appear across multiple religious traditions but have a particularly powerful presence in Christian theology. The concept of purgatory in the Catholic tradition, the idea that souls are purified by experiencing the consequences of their sins before they can be fully redeemed and admitted to the presence of God, is a direct theological ancestor of the penance stare. The Ghost Rider's power is essentially an instantaneous and concentrated delivery of purgatorial experience, bypassing the patience of divine timing and delivering reckoning in the present moment. This is why the power has moral weight and feels meaningfully different from ordinary violence. It is not cruelty. It is theologically structured justice, precisely calibrated to the individual's actual record of harm, which makes it something the film presents as genuinely righteous rather than simply brutal. The spiritual warfare dimension of the film, the conflict between Mephistopheles and Blackheart, between demonic forces pursuing different agendas against a human world caught between them, draws on a tradition of Christian theological thinking about the nature of evil that goes back to the earliest centuries of the Church. The idea that the visible world is contested territory in an invisible conflict between supernatural forces of good and evil, that human beings are caught in the middle of a war they can only partially perceive and understand, is a deeply embedded element of Christian theological imagination that has shaped Western art, literature, and culture for 2,000 years. Ghost Rider places this ancient theological drama in a contemporary American setting and gives it the language of superhero cinema, which is precisely the kind of translation that keeps ancient ideas alive and culturally relevant for new generations who might not otherwise encounter them. The motorcycle and its deep American cultural significance. The motorcycle in Ghost Rider is not simply a vehicle that the hero happens to ride because it looks dramatic and visually striking on screen. It is a cultural symbol with enormous and very specific meaning in American cultural history, and understanding what motorcycles represented in the cultural context of the 2007 film requires going back to the period after World War II when the motorcycle's meaning in American culture was fundamentally and permanently transformed. When large numbers of veterans returned to the United States after the Second World War, they came back having experienced the most intense and transformative circumstances any human beings can endure, and many of them found themselves genuinely unable to reintegrate into the placid domestic life of post-war suburban America. The culture they returned to was organized around stability, conformity, consumer comfort, and the suppression of the kind of raw and extreme experience that combat had forced upon them. Many of these veterans found each other and found community around motorcycles, forming clubs and riding groups that represented a kind of brotherhood built on the values of freedom, loyalty, and deliberate independence from a mainstream culture that could not understand what they had been through and seemed to have no real place for them. This is the cultural origin of the American outlaw biker mythology, and it is a mythology with genuine historical roots in the experience of a specific generation of American men facing a specific historical crisis of identity and belonging. This cultural tradition was romanticized and mythologized throughout the 1950s and 1960s, appearing in films like The Wild One with Marlon Brando in 1953, which introduced mainstream American audiences to the archetype of the rebellious biker and caused a moral panic in conservative culture that itself reflected just how potent the symbol had become. By the time Peter Fonda made Easy Rider in 1969, which was a cultural earthquake in American cinema and one of the films that single-handedly transformed Hollywood's approach to independent and personal filmmaking, the motorcycle had become one of the defining symbols of individual freedom and rebellion against social conformity in American popular culture. Peter Fonda's casting as Mephistopheles in Ghost Rider 2007 carries all of this cultural baggage into the film in a way that is both deliberate and deeply layered. Peter Fonda is the man who made the motorcycle a symbol of freedom in Easy Rider. In Ghost Rider, he plays the being who takes that freedom away from the film's hero, who uses a desperate young man's love for his father as the mechanism for enslaving him. The cultural resonance of this casting choice, the man who made the motorcycle a symbol of freedom playing the devil who steals a young rider's soul, is one of the most intelligent pieces of cultural encoding in the entire film, and it works whether or not the audience consciously registers the reference. Ghost Rider takes the established cultural symbolism of the motorcycle and adds this supernatural dimension to it. The motorcycle in Ghost Rider form is literally transformed by hellfire into something that transcends ordinary physical reality, which is a visual and metaphorical statement about what motorcycles have always meant culturally. They have always been associated with the transgression of ordinary limits, with the experience of freedom that comes from moving faster than conventional life permits, with a beautiful recklessness that ordinary social responsibility consistently discourages. Making that motorcycle supernatural is simply the logical and dramatic extreme of what the symbol was already pointing toward in a century of American cultural imagination. The historical context of Ghost Rider in the comics, and its 1972 cultural moment. The Ghost Rider character did not emerge from nothing when Marvel Comics published his first appearance in August 1972. He emerged from a very specific and historically significant cultural moment in American life, and understanding that moment helps explain why the character resonated so powerfully with audiences and has continued to do so across more than 5 decades. 1972 was a particular and deeply troubled moment in American cultural history. The Vietnam War was still ongoing, generating massive social division and a crisis of faith in American institutions and the moral authority of those who governed the country. The Watergate scandal was beginning to break open, eventually destroying the presidency of Richard Nixon and confirming for millions of Americans the darkest suspicions they had developed about the corruption of power. The idealism and energy of the 1960s counterculture, which had believed passionately in the possibility of fundamental social transformation, had by 1972 largely exhausted itself against the reality of a system that proved far more resistant to change than the idealists had hoped. American popular culture processed this collective disillusionment in a variety of powerful ways during the early 1970s. Cinema moved toward darker, more morally ambiguous storytelling with films like The Godfather, Dirty Harry, and Chinatown, all of which reflected a culture that had stopped believing in clean heroes and clear moral certainties. Comic books experienced their own version of this shift, with Marvel in particular pushing toward more complex and troubled characters who carried genuine moral ambiguity rather than the clean heroism of the previous era. Ghost Rider fit perfectly and powerfully into this cultural moment. He was not a clean hero operating within a comfortable system of clear moral principles. He was a man who had made a terrible mistake, been transformed by dark supernatural forces he did not choose and could not control, and was navigating a world where the lines between justice and vengeance, heroism and monstrosity, were genuinely and uncomfortably blurred. The film in 2007 inherited this historical context, and the cultural weight accumulated around the character over the 35 years between his comic book creation and his cinematic debut. By 2007, the character had moved through multiple versions and interpretations in the comics, each reflecting the particular cultural anxieties of its specific moment. The 2007 film drew on the full depth of this accumulated mythology and presented it to an audience that was itself navigating another period of American disillusionment, the aftermath of the September 11th attacks, the ongoing wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and a growing national conversation about what America stood for and what it was willing to do in the name of its own values. A story about a man weaponized by a dark force and struggling to turn that weapon towards something righteous rather than simply destructive had genuine cultural resonance in that particular historical moment. The film's place in the pre-MCU era of Marvel cinema. Ghost Rider 2007 occupies a genuinely unique and historically significant position in the broader history of superhero cinema that is only fully visible in retrospect. It was one of the last major Marvel character films made before the Marvel Cinematic Universe came into existence with Iron Man in 2008, and this timing gives it a very particular character that distinguishes it from everything that came after. In the pre-MCU era, Marvel characters were being adapted independently by different studios with different creative visions, different tonal approaches, and different understandings of what a superhero film could or should be. This produced a wildly varied landscape of films ranging from Sam Raimi's celebrated Spider-Man trilogy, which approached the material with a pop art sensibility and genuine emotional warmth, to Ang Lee's Hulk in 2003, which attempted a deeply psychological and art house approach to the character, to the Daredevil and Elektra films, which pursued a darker and more gothic tone. Ghost Rider belongs to this period of genuine creative experimentation, when nobody had yet established the template that the MCU would eventually turn into the dominant model for the entire genre. What this means culturally is that Ghost Rider 2007 is a product of a moment when individual artistic vision and specific creative choices still had enormous influence over how a Marvel character was interpreted for the screen, before the development of a shared universe with established tonal and narrative conventions created both the coherence and the creative constraints of the MCU model. The film is idiosyncratic and specific in ways that would be virtually impossible within the MCU's framework, and that idiosyncrasy is simultaneously one of its most criticized qualities and one of its most culturally interesting ones. The gothic and supernatural tone of Ghost Rider, its willingness to engage seriously with theological concepts about souls and damnation and divine vengeance, its aesthetic debt to the American Western and to horror cinema, and its deeply strange central performance from Nicolas Cage. All of these qualities reflect a creative freedom that the pre-MCU era permitted and that the managed consistency of the shared universe era has largely foreclosed. Whatever its flaws as a film, Ghost Rider 2007 represents something genuinely irreplaceable in the history of superhero cinema, a moment when one of Marvel's darkest and most mythologically rich characters was brought to the screen by filmmakers and an actor who were willing to lean fully into the strangeness and darkness of the material without softening it into something more safely mainstream. The legacy and cultural endurance of the character. The fact that Ghost Rider as a character has retained a passionate and dedicated fanbase across more than 50 years of publication, through multiple film adaptations, through television appearances in the Marvel Universe, and through countless reimaginings in different cultural contexts and historical periods, is itself a piece of cultural data that deserves examination. Characters do not endure for half a century simply because they have cool visuals, though Ghost Rider's visuals are undeniably striking. They endure because they are touching something real in the human experience, something that generation after generation of audiences continues to recognize and respond to. The core of what Ghost Rider touches is the experience of being bound. Bound by a past decision made in a moment of weakness or desperation. Bound by forces larger than yourself that you did not choose and cannot escape. Bound by a nature that you did not select and that does not always reflect who you want to be or how you want to move through the world. This experience of constraint imposed by history and by the consequences of past choices is one of the most universal dimensions of human experience, and Ghost Rider externalizes it in the most dramatic and visually spectacular way possible. Johnny Blaze walking around with a flaming skull trying to contain the supernatural force inside him is a metaphor that requires no translation. Every person who has ever felt imprisoned by their own history, by the things they have done or failed to do, by the choices that seemed necessary in a moment of desperation and then became the architecture of their permanent existence, recognizes something of themselves in that image. The film's ultimate cultural message, delivered in the scene where Johnny refuses to reclaim his soul and instead vows to use the Ghost Rider against the devil's own purposes, is perhaps the most genuinely American statement in the entire story. The message is not that the past can be undone or that bad bargains can be retroactively renegotiated into good ones. It is that even within the constraints that history and consequence impose, even within a situation that offers no clean or comfortable resolution, a person retains the power to choose what their constraint means and how they will carry it. That is not freedom in the absolute sense. But it is the kind of freedom that is actually available to most people in most situations, and that is why it resonates. And that right there is everything you need to know about Ghost Rider 2007. From the ancient mythology that gave birth to the character, to the Faustian literary tradition that shaped the story, to the American frontier culture that runs through every frame of the film, to the lives of the extraordinary actors who brought it all to life on screen. This is a movie that operates on far more levels than most people give it credit for, and if this video helped you see it differently or appreciate it more deeply than you did before, then everything we set out to do here was worth it. Ghost Rider is not just a man with a flaming skull on a motorcycle. He is the product of thousands of years of human storytelling about justice, vengeance, redemption, and the weight of choices made in desperate moments. He is the American frontier lawman reborn as a supernatural force. He is Faust refusing his own ending. He is every person who has ever felt bound by something they did not fully choose and decided to carry that weight with dignity rather than surrender to it. That is why this character has lasted for over 50 years and why people are still talking about this film nearly 2 decades after it first hit cinema screens. If you enjoyed this deep dive, the single best thing you can do right now is hit that like button below. It takes 1 second and it makes an enormous difference in helping this channel reach more people who love this kind of detailed, passionate content. If you know someone who loves Marvel, who loves supernatural storytelling, who loves Nicolas Cage, or who simply appreciates a film being taken seriously and examined honestly, share this video with them right now. And if you are watching this and you have not yet subscribed to this channel, today is the day. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so that every time we drop something new, you are the first to know. We put everything we have into every single video on this channel, and the fact that you watched all the way to the end means more than you know. This community is built by people exactly like you, curious, passionate, and unwilling to accept a shallow answer when a deeper one is available.